When is criticism of Israel Jews anti-Semitic? An alternative to the 3Ds formula. This is a two-part video. The first part will be discussing how to recognize bad faith criticism from anti-Semites. The second part will delve more into the psychological effects of anti-Semitism and how it leads people to make bad faith criticism of Israel. Criticism of Israel is often called anti-Semitic, and Jew haters try to dismiss people who call them out by arguing that the word anti-Semitism is overused. Not all critics of Israel are anti-Semites, but all anti-Semites certainly do criticize Israel. Most Jewish and pro-Israel commenters are aware of Jewish former Soviet dissident Natan Sharansky's 3Ds formulation. Criticism of Israel can be said to be anti-Semitic when it involves all of the 3Ds: delegitimization, demonization, dehumanization, and double standards. This formulation has been very clarifying for a lot of people looking at this, but I would like to offer an alternative. While the 3Ds are a decent metric for evaluating content, I think it is also useful to create a metric for evaluating the person. The 3Ds formula doesn't really go into the psychology behind the person making the verbal attack on Israel, and that's important to understand as well. Sharansky's standard is designed essentially to determine whether a criticism is legitimate or not. A person motivated by anti-Semitism is not making a critique in good faith, which means that changing Israel's behavior or the behavior of Israel's supporters will not make the person spreading the criticism change their standing towards Israel. The question of anti-Semitism's role in hostility towards Israel is important because Israel is encouraged to take active measures which may endanger its population, based on the notion that such action is necessary to improve Israel's standing and external support. A classic example of this is Israel being criticized for its occupation of Gaza and southern Lebanon. Israel was blamed for violence from these two areas because of its occupation. Israel withdrew from these two areas and allowed them to be taken over by Hamas and Hezbollah, respectively. When major wars were started against Israel by these two groups, the same people who blamed Israel for provoking violence with its control over these areas immediately blamed Israel for the wars that resulted from Israel's withdrawal. The people who criticized Israel for its occupation of South Lebanon and Gaza were obviously not acting in good faith. Israel's withdrawals, done in large part to appease these bad faith critics, led to severe negative consequences for the Israeli people. So how do we know when criticism of Israel is being done in bad faith by bigots? First, we ask, is the criticism itself really stupid or dependent on the intended audience being ignorant? Second, is the person making the criticism impervious to contradictory information? Third, does the person criticize Israel's actions while refusing to offer any viable alternative? Let's go through these in more detail, starting with one of the more common criticisms, that Israel is using disproportionate force and is in the wrong because more people die on the enemy side than on the Israeli side. First question, is the critique really stupid or dependent on the intended audience's ignorance? To put it simply, the idea that Israel is the bad guy in the various wars because the IDF kills more people on the terrorists' side than the terrorists are able to kill on the Israeli side is one, the single most idiotic ideas that are given any kind of respectability in the public space. It is such a stupid concept that it can be difficult to argue against the first time you hear it, because only someone with no understanding of the nature of warfare and international relations could believe it. I'm not going to bother explaining why the Israel's counter-offensive is disproportionate, because there are literally dozens of videos on YouTube where people explain why it's so stupid. This brings us to the next question. Is the person making the criticism impervious to contradictory information? No matter how many times pro-Israel people explain Why this standard for determining who is the aggressor-ish villain is dumb, it still keeps being lobbed at Israel. There have been literally hundreds of interviews with Israeli spokesmen and supporters by various international news outlets in which the anti-Israel interviewer accuses Israel of using disproportionate force or frames Israel as the villain because more people on the enemy side have been killed. Again and again, the pro-Israel side, including experts in military and political strategy, keep debunking this narrative, and the various media outlets keep using it. Variations on the same basic exchange have happened hundreds of times, and yet the anchors still act like they don't already know the response to their argument of disproportionate force. If a person says something as stupid as this,
academics who see this and say, oh my God, if I criticize Israel, this is the end of my career. That's a terrible message for the Kennedy School to be sending.
It's also a terrible message at a time when everyone claims to care about free speech, and yet there are still so many taboos, it seems, when it comes to getting gigs at top universities.
And no matter how much you point out the avalanche of anti-Israel public statements, it just bounces right off them. That's a good indicator that you're not dealing with someone acting in good faith. Lastly, do the people criticizing Israel for its disproportionate military response ever offer a viable alternative? Like, seriously, do they ever make any kind of suggestion for how Israel can respond to massive rocket barrages or terrorist attacks or mass murders that is not completely ridiculous? Most of the time, they don't even pretend to have an alternative strategy. This is because they are not making criticisms in good faith to try to improve Israel's behavior. They are making psychological attacks that are designed to demoralize the Israeli people, encourage their defeat, and drain public support for Israel's existence. You will notice that there is plenty of room to make criticisms of Israel, specific Jewish people, and Jewish organizations that are not anti-Semitic, but rather good faith arguments to alter behavior. You can disagree with good faith criticisms, but you shouldn't dismiss the people making them the same way you should with anti-Semites. This concludes this video, which explains how you can determine if a person criticizing Israel is motivated by anti-Semitism or some other foolish belief system. I discuss why anti-Semitism leads people to make such dumb arguments. In the next video, the psychological effects of anti-Semitism. Or why are anti-Semites so stupid?